Millicent Unplugged for September 2023. Sara and I are happy to be back at it after a 3-month hiatus. So my name is Karen Chertok. I'm the Director of Education at Millicent Rogers Museum, and happy that you all are able to join us this evening. At the Millicent Rogers Museum, we are located on ancestral lands of the Tiwa-speaking people known today as the Red Willow people of Taos Pueblo. We strive to deepen our relationship with the Red Willow people through collaboration while acknowledging and honoring the complex history of the Red Willow people, past, present, and future. We express gratitude to this land and to the Taos Pueblo elders, ancestors who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. So thank you for joining us for this topic about bees. And you will see in my background, I have this nice little bee on a Russian sage, which I happened to capture today at the museum. So there is the MRM bee for the day. The essential nature of bees is the topic of this conversation. From food scarcity to health and beauty benefits, bees are vital to our world. The 2023 spring season brought the MRM an abundance of flowering plants, including chives and peonies, much to my surprise, I will admit, that emerged following several years of dormancy, which really sparked a renewed interest in the role of pollinators and what's happening with our bees, not only in our community, but in our region and, of course, on our planet. So we would love to welcome our guests this evening, Gael and Ty Minton. And Ty was deeply involved in designing and developing the program aspect of our courtyard native plant pollinator garden in 2007. And I also welcome Moira O'Hanlon, who is the owner of Taos Bee. And then, of course, my dear friend, Sara Francis, our moderator, photographer, and author. And we have another guest, Bonnie Olson, who is a beekeeper from Colorado Springs. Hopefully she will be joining us. And so, Sara, would you like to take it away?
Oh, this is just a totally wonderful program to have, because I've been a gardener since I was like 5 years old, and Grandma had a giant garden. And so I must tell you that I know everything there is to know about worker bees. Now, full disclosure, but I am for the museum. Otherwise, I know absolutely nothing except that we welcome them graciously in our gardens. And so you all are going to tell us everything we need to know. And perhaps starting, Gael, do you want to kind of lead off and tell us how you got into it and how you happen to how Ty happened to be part of the Millicent's volunteer program to create the garden?
Sure, Sara, I'd be happy to just say briefly and then more later. I've always been a honey eater and also a gardener, from my grandparents to my parents, and then married a gardener, Ty. And we retired to Taos in 2001 and began our little 2-acre experiment on historically irrigated land off of the Sequía del Monte, Del Rio Chiquito, sort of the southern end of Taos. And in 2005, I took a course at I can't even remember the name of the institute in Santa Fe with Les Crowder, who is a master beekeeper, and learned a lot from him, sitting there with bees buzzing all around me. My mother was very allergic and I was a little nervous, but no stinging, lots of buckets with freshly gathered honey, and that got me interested in learning about the top bar beekeeping process. And we had a wonderful neighbor in Taos, Emmett Marks, who also learned from Les Crowder, and he taught a couple of classes here, or more than that, in the summers and in the spring. And I began with 2 top bar hives in 2008 and maintained those until about 2014, and had a lot of losses. I thought, well, maybe I would try Moira hive, a little small 12-inch box, and that was not successful at all, and for me. And then have finally settled on just the small Langstroth box hives that I'm actually letting Melanie do most of the work, Melanie Kirby, at my place now. I help her. So
Hear more about that later.
Yeah.
Because that's our introduction.
Yes.
And Moira, I will tell you that Karen was the one who introduced me to your company products. And my husband suffers from facial difficulties, eczemas, and he is reacting very well to what you produce. And so this is something from the land. I mean, it's grassroots stuff here, and not just in our neighborhood. This is all across the country and the world, as I understand. Am I correct in that?
What, my products?
Oh, that interest in making bee products for health and well-being in general.
Well, so I started beekeeping when I moved here in 2003, and I used to help Emmett and Les Crowder. And Les Crowder's actually got me into the top bar, which I still do. But the reason I started making my products was because I was caring for my mother, and she had dementia, and she also had a lot of problems with her skin. And the doctors kept giving her chemicals. And I realized one day as I walked into my apiary that I had everything there to heal her skin. And so I put together the balm, which is now, you can get it in small, medium, and large tubes and tins. And it healed her skin, and it healed everybody else who's tried it as well. It's just amazing. It's got royal jelly, pollen, propolis, honey, beeswax, and organic sunflower seed oil. So these products are really from the land. They're from the bees. They honor the bees as well by just not messing with the amazing products that they make. And I have about between 20 and 25 hives usually every year. Depends on what happens to them. And it's all top bar. They're all located in my my orchard, which is here in Arroyo Seco. And I get lots and lots of fruit because I've got all these pollinators right there. I've got at least 1 million pollinators right in my orchard. So that's amazing.
Well, that's a super good segue, because that's part of the reason, Moira, that I wanted to do this program is just, I mean, I am certainly no bee expert, and I want to hear more about this top bar process. But as I researched into it, I was getting a lot of statistics about the bee population declining, and then also our reliance on bees for food. Like, here's an example: 1 in 4 bites of or items of food you eat are dependent on bees. So then, I wanted to just look more deeply, and I started looking around the museum, like, how do bees intersect with this? Because I knew we had the garden and, of course, your products. And so Yeah, are you familiar with, I'm sure you are, all, the not just the community, but the global effort that your small business does to support the bee population?
Well, I do not manage my bees very much. I don't
Mhm.
give them any chemicals. They are completely natural. And the reason I do the top bar is I'm not solely a honey producer. I produce beeswax as well. And plus, top bars are higher and they're easier to manage as you get older and you don't want to lift up those heavy weights of honey. So I just find it more manageable. Um, and supporting the bees in this way, I figure I'm doing something good for bee populations because I'm not micromanaging them or trying to control the genetics of them, which is something that's happening a lot in the
Okay.
greater bee population. And so far, from what I've seen, human intervention really doesn't help a lot. In fact, it usually harms. So I try to stay out of their way and just let them be, really. They know what they're doing. As a beekeeper, all we do is take off the roof, mess with their honey and beeswax, rearrange their furniture,
Mhm.
steal their food, and then put it all back together again. And no wonder they get pissed off with us and sting me every once in a while, though not that often. But,
Yeah.
you know, they know what they're doing. And so I try to leave them to do the best they can. And my bees really do very well here, even though it gets pretty cold and the springtime is really treacherous for bees around here. It gets warm, it gets cold, it gets, just switching around and it's difficult, but they're doing very well in my orchard and I don't move them around um, except if I have to, uh, like if I catch a swarm from one of my hives, then I move it up to El Salto to a friend's house up there for about a month and then move it back because they've got bears in El Salto.
What does
Which
that mean, catch a swarm?
Well, it's when basically your queen decides that she wants a new hive. She wants a new house. This is how I put it anyway. I know it's not technical, but anyway. And she takes half the population. What she does is she lays a bunch of queen cells and she decides to move because the population is too big for that hive. And they just hang out in these beautiful swarm I don't know, they look
Great.
like birds, and they're just fabulous, and they usually just hang out for not that long in my orchard. I mean, I have to be in the spring, I have to be on the lookout, like, twice a day I check, and you have to catch them pretty quickly and rehouse them, and that works very well. It's a natural way that they, divide their hives.
Oh, wow.
And then I usually the queen will lay between 6 and 9, sometimes more queen cells. And if they're on different bars, you can then make more divisions. And so you can get even more. And it's just, but each hive has one queen, many, many workers, and a bunch of drones there too. Those are the male ones that spread the genetics.
How do you
So,
capture the breakout groups, if we call them?
oh, the swarm, it's actually catching a swarm is very, very easy, actually. All you do is I put a small hive underneath. I have these ones called nukes. They're just like half a hive. I put it under the swarm and you just shake the branch and they fall in there.
Yeah.
And as long as you end up with the queen in that nuke, all the rest of the bees go in there. So basically, you just kind of wait until they all go in and surround the queen who they're attracted to her pheromones, and then you can just relocate it. It's very easy, and they don't want to sting you when they're swarming because they're not protective of their hive. because they send out workers looking for a new hive. And I just tend to catch them at that point.
Tell us a little bit about what do the actual hive boxes that you use look like?
Well, they're about 4 feet long. They're about a foot deep, and they kind of mimic a half a log, basically. And what you do is you've kind of hollowed out a log, but we just build them, and you put the bars across the top. And if you look at my website, I think there's some pictures of it there. But the bees just build the beeswax to mimic the inside of the hive. And the great thing about it is you can just pick up one at a time. So it's not like picking up a super, which are very heavy. They can be up to 50 pounds. And I couldn't do the normal Langstroth beehives. So the top bar, and then you have a roof over the top. They look different, but Les Crowder and Heather Harrell's book, Top Bar Beekeeping, has a map of how to make one. They're very, very simple. I made mine. So if I can do it, anybody can.
Well, now, Gail, the hive you're describing that you're using is a bit different. Tell us how that is constructed, please.
Currently I am using these small Langstroth boxes, and they hold 8 frames. And like the top bar, they're a little bit smaller bar across the box, which is 12 inches square about, or no, it's more like 15 inches square and about 10 inches deep. And then like Moira is saying with the top bar, the comb is built on that individual bar. Those small boxes hold about 8 frames. And it is a very, certainly in my top bar days, and now with this, these combs can, we hope that they will be built straight across the little piece of wood that is resting on the sides of the box. Very often they do what is cross combing. They merge, they touch each other, and that's part of the management of it, is trying to keep those as straight as possible so that you can take that bar out and look at it to see the new brood and larvae that are developing into the new bees. That's how you look to see where your queen is, if she's still alive, whether there are queen cells there on the bar. And you just kind of keep those 8 bars as separate as you can, and you build 3 or 4 boxes high, keeping the entrance, the lowest box, pretty open so that they can move on up to the top. And usually there's, you can, as the season is going, depending how many bees are there and how much laying they're doing and making of new comb, you want to be sure that they have honey there as well as the comb that they're laying in. So it's very similar to the top bar, but it is in this layer of boxes. And the beauty of the top bar, which I also enjoyed, I think it was 2016, 17 when I moved away. So it was 8 years I did top bar, and it is just a wonderful, as Moira is saying, setup of being able to open the roof and see the bars and be able to move them around to make it more comfortable for them to produce.
when you look at the frames,
Mhm.
some of them have the cells with the larva and the developing bees, and is the honey on a separate one, or how does that work?
Yeah. Well, it can, Moira is much more experienced with this than I am, but it is mixed. You can have a brood, which is capped, and you look at your comb and you'll see little brown caps on all the cells. And then when the larvae are developing, they're not covered, and then there often is honey on that same bar. So now when the nectar is really flowing and they're making a lot of honey, what I've noticed is that one bar will be mostly honey and not the brood and not the larvae.
Interesting. I find this fascinating because the technique of it is so grassroots and so simple, and yet so complex. Because as Moira is saying, you leave them to their own selves, and they just do the work.
Yes, they do.
That's quite extraordinary. Then, before we go on to talking about the role of the pollinators so much, Moira, tell us more about the harvesting. How do you know when to harvest? And then how is the harvesting done?
So with top bar, the difference mainly between top bar and Langstuff is the top bar, we do not have a frame around the comb. And so we cannot spin the honey out. So what I have to do is cut the comb off, mash it up, and let it drip the honey out of the comb. And then I harvest the comb for my products and the honey to eat, basically, and also for my products. But when you harvest is when there's an excess of honey. And this year has been really dry around here, as I has been in the Rockies. And we're not getting a lot of honey this year. It's a little dire actually at the moment. And I've had to feed my bees because their bars are so slim and light. And I leave a lot of honey with my bees, so I make sure they make it through the winter. I don't just feed my bees in the winter. I leave them with their honey because it's so protective for them. And it has pollen in it, and there's a lot of propolis in it as well. So it's amazing stuff. So I haven't harvested any yet. And yet last year I harvested 200 pounds.
Wow.
And I may harvest maybe 50 this year. We'll see. But so far I haven't.
And with this
Decline. Sorry, Sarah. Have you seen a decline in your bee population, and is that common?
It is common. The population does fluctuate. Some years I lose quite a few hives. Other years I don't lose any. And that's one of the sorrowful things about beekeeping is that you do have this fluctuation in how they live. And about 30 years ago and before then, beekeeping was really quite easy. And because I've talked to a lot of old timers and they're like, oh yeah, we used to have just all these hives. And now it's a struggle to keep them. And one of the issues is beginner beekeepers often get one hive. And I always recommend they do 3 because you're probably going to lose at least one hive. And if you only have one hive, you probably are going to lose that hive. And it's really hard. And nature fluctuates. It just does.
Mm-hmm.
And we just have to learn to go with the flow and just support nature as we can, which is what I try to do with my bees and my property here, which is not very big, but there's a lot on it and a lot prospering here. So you know, it's like Gail's property. Gail has a lot of great trees and pollinating plants.
Fruits, flowers, yeah.
Yeah.
Bees.
I
What-
wonder if you can make that connection between the pollinator gardens and the beekeeping and the feeding of the bees, and maybe Ty could talk about his role and his plans in developing that whole native plant garden.
Oh, yeah. Ty is not feeling very much like talking, unfortunately. He's very honored to be here and loved that process, but he's just recovering. Moira, Ty has West Nile virus and he's been sick for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
And
Yeah.
I appreciate that Ty wanted to be on the show even in
Yeah.
spite of that. So
So
thank
I
you.
will, yes, and I will just say in his place that we have managed this property for 23 years now, and it's a totally joint process. And he's been the key irrigator, making sure that we always have plenty of water for the bees in our bird baths, and that a lot of our plants are not on drip. They just are irrigated when we have acequia water. But we do grow a lot of cosmos, zinnias, calendulas, hollyhocks, amaranth, a lot of those things self-seed them, which is great. We so in that sense, you know, they aren't dependent only on the drip. And one of the bushes that we really like for bees is a fern bush, and I can't remember the scientific name, but there are many native bushes that are great, and ours are loaded with not only the honeybees but 4 or 5 different species of bumblebees and many little tiny native bees.
Mhm.
Gail, can you list a couple of different plants that people might want to look to putting in their own gardens that are good in the West here with generally minimal water?
Yes, certainly that fern bush, things like salvia, blue globe thistle, yeah, the lambsir that lives and doesn't even have to be on irrigation. The bees just love that. Very subtle little pink flower on a spike. People are familiar with those, and they're kind of invasive. They'll spread everywhere. The native 4 o'clock is another beautiful and very good bee attractor. Oh boy, Les Crowder has just the most wonderful list in the back of his book for trees, woody shrubs, and flowering plants. So,
I find
So, as far as plants,
wonderful on that I've got a giant bush in the front that is just full day after day. But
well, I'm remembering we have 2 at our garden courtyard gate. The Joe Pieweed, I think it's an Asteraceae, and oh boy, bees and the honeybees love that too. There's certainly Gary Paul Nabhan has written a lot. He wrote a book with another guy called Forgotten Pollinators, probably 20 years ago or more. And there's a lot of, I think, confusion about whether honeybees interfere with the native populations of pollinators. And he says quite convincingly that they do not. And so there have been some good studies showing that, and certainly by seeing the activity on our property, we have both honeybees. You know, we only have two. I've never had 3 hives, maybe just for a brief time, but 2 hives. And Moira, what would you say? There can be, 60,000 bees in a hive. And so
Yeah.
if you're 2, you've got 120,000 bees.
Yeah.
Not that they're all feeding at once, but, and it varies when in winter, it goes down to, there maybe maintain only at about 10,000, but we don't see any interference with native bees. And I did attend that wonderful talk with the Native Plant Society about 2 years ago with Bonnie or Beverly, I forget her name, Carol, Carril. She's have you ever heard her, Moira, speak?
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah, she's just a wonderful expert on the way bees have evolved with flowers and various plants. And I asked that question at that talk about the honeybees. Are they interfering with natives? And she said no.
I found that the catmint is amazing for all sorts of bees, and especially bumblebees.
Yeah.
I've got at least 4 different types here, and honeybees on the catmint, which they adore.
Yeah, they're eating together and not having a problem. Rocky Mountain bee plant, that's another one.
And also the native geranium here with that tiny little purple flower.
Yeah.
It is covered with bees all the time, but honeybees, not native bees.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find some small honeybee, native bees here too, especially that little iridescent green one. It's just fabulous looking. Oh, so gorgeous. So I'm finding that they're all on the plants, and Chamisa is just about to start blooming, and they'll all be over on those as well.
Tell us about the different types of pollinators and what proportion of the overall pollinator band do the honeybees that deal with fruit and those things that we eat. What percentage is that of the overall?
Sorry, I missed that last word.
I think I have a statistic around that, Sarah. I think there's 20,000 species of bees worldwide. Does that sound correct?
Something like that, yeah.
So I found a website, the Bee Conservancy. Great website. And that there is actually a very small portion of that are honeybees. I think 7 species.
Yeah. The thing is that it's interesting because I've talked to a few entomologists, and there are always many honeybees or native bees right around the universities that have an entomology department. And that's where they're finding them because there are entomologists out there capturing them. So, and I just don't think that they're looking for that many around. So I think there's a lot more insects to find. And we also have to talk about pollinators. Moths are pollinators. And there's so many
butterflies,
yeah. And there's just so much, people are killing so many of them. It's very disturbing. Very disturbing.
Yeah. So I wonder if, so can you speak to how important it is for communities to work this part of why I wanted to have this program? It's like wherever you are, wherever you live, like the whole community of, let's Taos County all make sure we have, bee forage and places for bees to live. Habitat loss is the biggest, one of the biggest issues. So plant your little native plants, even if you're not into gardening. I think, so I guess what I'm asking is, if people in the community have more plants that support bees, whether it's forage or habitat, or simply clean gardening where you're not using any chemicals, does that help support your hives as well? Do the
Yes.
bees go out and come back?
Yeah, the bees, European honeybees are the ones that we have in our hives. They will fly out to about 2 miles from the hive. And yes, it makes a huge difference that there are plants that they can pollinate and get pollen from and nectar.
Mhm.
And if people are spraying, it will affect them. The nicotianoids, basically,
Yeah.
they're called neonics. They give them instant dementia, and they cannot find their way back to the hive, which is heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And when you open up a hive and it's empty, it's because someone's come back and said, oh, there's all this wonderful stuff. And they've done a little dance and they've all gone out there, all the worker bees have. And they're not coming back. And that's really disappointing. And another issue there is all of the mowing that goes on. There's just excessive mowing in this country, or in European countries anyway, Western. And that's cutting down on all of the habitat and forage for bees and pollinators. And I actually sell some bee seeds, I call them, from my website. Just native flowers to grow. They can grow anywhere in the Rockies because we need to increase the forage, food for bees,
Mm-hmm.
which is really, it is quite dire in a lot of places. Luckily here we have a lot of alfalfa fields around, and we don't have much spraying here. Though,
Yeah.
of course, Ace and Walmart still sell Roundup and insecticide, which means you kill insects.
Mm-hmm.
Bees are part of that. So it's basically showing people how much it matters to have pollinators, and not only bees, moths as well, butterflies, just anything that flies around is not necessarily bad unless it has West Nile disease in it.
Right, right. And Sara, you're an avid gardener. Do you notice a lot of bees? And so you're doing your part. I want to extend it up into the region of your Denver area, because Bonnie was from Colorado Springs too. And when we're talking about bees, there's no borders, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you see there?
That's the problem. We're in a very large urban area as opposed to the Taos, northern New Mexico, and even southern Colorado. And so yes, it was actually last year for us, there was a shortage of bees as I saw them. This year it's been much wetter, and they're swarming all the time. Our entire front yard of our house, that would be approximately 1,500 square feet maybe, is a garden with the idea of color and beauty and giving forage for the bees. Only a very few of our neighbors have fruit trees that bear, but those that do, we're definitely helping them out to some extent. I do not know where our bees come from. That's the other problem. I have no idea where their homes are. And occasionally we'll see some in a hole in a tree. What is either birds or insects have been hollowed out, but that is very rare. And of course, again, that's the urban situation. We're half a block from a park, but the park does not have any floral of any kind. And so our thing is doing the part to get as many pollinators in the neighborhood as possible. Of course, the western slope of Colorado with all the fruit production, that's the major thing, is a few hives disappear or disintegrate from one, and then it's a tragedy in their area because we don't have the fruit, and Colorado peaches are way important, which reminds me to bring up the historical thing. And hopefully, Gail, you can talk for Ty about this. One of the big historical things about New Mexico was the priests who brought fruit trees originally and began that heritage of having everything from regular trees to wine-bearing grapes in your neighborhood, and they all depend on the bees.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they brought bees too.
There's that great book called Gardens of New Spain. Now I've read that way long ago. Can't remember the author. I don't remember him talking about them bringing bees, but so maybe, I don't know. I'd have to look that back up. That's a wonderful book, Gardens of New Spain. And
I want to just jump in and voice Linda Engel's comment because we are recording this for future audience who won't see the chat. Linda is talking about in the Denver area that usually there's abundance of bees, but this year they are very scarce. And then so I was just chatting back to her. I wonder if other urban gardeners are seeing the same thing. And alongside that, one of the pieces of information on the Bee Conservancy website is that since 1947, 60%, there's been a decline in a 60% decline in bee population since 1947.
honeybee,
Yes.
not natives.
You know what? I would have to clarify that perhaps, but
the natives have not declined like that. We have about 1,000 native species in New Mexico. That's a lot of different kinds of bees.
Right, of course.
But the honeybees are very susceptible to the pesticides and fertilizers that are chemically used, and a lot of home gardeners who are still using that kind of thing. You know, really trying to kill certain insects because they want things alive. And so
we're really differentiating between honeybees and other bees in terms of pollinators. And so I guess that's a good point to bring up for people, that we're not trying to say it's all doomsday sort of bees are going, but when we look at these statistics, to be mindful of that differentiation. Are we talking honeybees? Are we talking native bees? Are we talking pollinators in general? Because that makes a big difference. So thanks for bringing that to the forefront, Gail.
And I'd just like to point out that bumblebees often have their nests in the ground. Mm-hmm. And so they need undisturbed ground to do that in. And that means unmowed, undisturbed. And I've got lots of bumblebees on my property. And yet I talked to a Native American at the Taos Pueblo, and he mentioned that he hadn't seen as many bumblebees this year. And I don't know why that is.
Well, yeah, it's true. The mowing is one issue, but I like to remember that Les Crowder and what I would say are all the natural beekeepers believe in having hedgerows along your fields. And that I heard a talk once in Santa Fe at a beekeeper association meeting by a bumblebee expert, and she's saying, like you are, Moira, that they nest in the ground, but they can nest on the edge of these fields that are irrigated and mowed. So it is very important to leave swath of unmowed grass, alfalfa, native grasses, and maybe native plums, choke cherries. Yeah, those bumblebees love to be in the ground. Yeah.
Yep, they
That-
do.
That's the hedgerow thing is a big deal in the places that we've lived in the past, in Ohio and Florida.
Yeah.
Where exactly that. And I remember that was something of heritage that grandmother would always say, that if they mowed a certain meadow, they would leave a pathway. And I didn't understand it exactly at the time, but it makes perfect sense. And then I wanted to ask you ladies, for instance, our good friend Felix Earle, the master gardener out of Ganado, because there is so little forage there, he opens watermelons and sets them out. And I noticed that, well, you've already said that you don't really feed the bees much, but he doesn't have the resource of the forage for them. So that's how he's taking care of it. Do you think that's, I mean, he's figured out what works for him, I suppose.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah. I've put out watermelon on my compost, and I haven't noticed bees going there. So I guess they haven't figured out the watermelons in Taos for the bees.
I read something that I'm curious to try, which is create a bee bath. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, Gail, or
Yes.
so you take
So
does it work?
Yes, absolutely. So I
Describe
always
it.
have a dog bowl outside for my dogs, and a bee area where they can get some water. And you have to have some rocks in there because they're terrible swimmers. So
Right.
one day earlier this year, I walked outside and this bee kept buzzing me and buzzing me. And I was like, what? What do you want? And I looked down and the dog bowl was empty. So I filled that up. And then I went over to the bee bowl and it was empty as well. And the bee was just telling me, we need water.
Yeah.
Right.
My acequia hadn't flowed for a week or something. And so they needed water. And just make sure that they're not going to drown because they're just the worst swimmers. They really are.
Because
One of the
because
recommendations I
shallow and full of rocks, and they
full of
just
pebbles so
Yeah.
that it comes above the water,
Yeah.
so that they can land on the pebble and get to the water.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. That works great.
Don't want them, the pebbles too slippery. It's
No.
Right.
They could have.
Well, I would like to share a little bit. I'm going to actually turn off my background so that you can see this book. So let me just give me a second here. And there we go. So I found this book today, and to be honest with you, I got just a little plug for Moira. I got some of this spray.
Oh, nice.
But I found this book and I thought this was so sweet. It's Listening with Your Heart, Lessons from Native America. And it's by, the author is Wayne Pete, MD, and he is a practicing physician and sharing wisdom from the indigenous cultures. He's from Iroquois heritage that he draws upon. And so there's one little writing in here. It's called The Pollen Pathway. If gold is your hunger, let the yellow of honey sweeten your day. Let the yellow of the sun grow the plants in your fields. Let the amber of the corn feed your children. Let the gold of the sunset warm your soul. Follow the gold of the pollen way, and you will be happy with all the riches that you have.
Oh,
So,
that's so lovely.
Isn't that sweet? It's just a little teeny volume, but it touched my heart, so I wanted to share it. and we're kind of heading towards the end. So I want to sort of wrap up, and I have a few things. Before I do that, Sarah, is there anything you want to ask? Any final?
Yes, if we have just a minute, either Gail, Forty, or Karen, tell us about the gardens, the new remake of the gardens at the Millicent Rogers Museum, and why people would want to come and visit, because you're obviously trying to go in this direction of creating a pollinator-friendly environment.
Sure. We had some, so I'll kind of start with, we had we do events at the museum, and coming out of the pandemic, we had an event tent because we really wanted to use our outdoor spaces for people. Well, that's kind of evolved. And this year we had a wedding that happened here, and the people who were putting on the wedding, their family, the Berry family, had some landscaping redone, which was such a blessing for the museum, really. And so our east lawn is much different. There are a lot of pollinator plants over there. Well, after that happened, so we thank the Berry family for providing that. But after that happened, I noticed peonies growing, stopped me dead in my tracks. I was like, is that a peony? And I walked closer, and sure enough, it was. Now, it wasn't grand, it wasn't vibrant in hue, but it was a pink peony nonetheless, never fully bloomed, but there were, I think, 3 blossoms on there, and one of them bloomed. And then I started seeing chives, and again I'm like, are those chives really? And so I know that things are kind of waking up a little bit this year, and I don't know why. Like Moira mentioned, nature is dynamic, cycles happen. And so I really got to thinking about the bees, in terms of, that's one area that with pollinators we can really, as a community, kind of support the bee population. I mean, how hard is that to do, really? So that's my interest, and that's what I noticed at the museum. I don't know if you noticed different plants on your properties, either you, Gail, or Moya.
You mean coming up or thriving? Well, yeah, it may have been a very dry summer for bees, but we have a lot of blooming and a lot of foraging going on. We haven't tried to do any harvesting yet, so I'm not sure how much honey has been made, but I think certainly a fair amount. And like Moira, we don't take if there's there's a different ways of kind of calculating how much you should leave, and if you to leave plenty for them. I wanted just as a closing thing to mention an article in the Greenfire Times of, I think it's July, August, about the sort of Pueblo people who are starting a pollinator preserve at Santa Clara and San Ildefonso, Hawaii. It's a great article called the Poe Povey Flower Path. And so there's a lot, and actually Roxanne Swensel, the sculptor, is a part of that. And 2 or 3 other people, and Melanie is involved in that.
Is that on the current Greenfire Times?
Let's see what if I can say. It is July, August.
Okay.
Yeah, page 26. So they're doing a lot of work with planting and educating.
Oh, that's great.
Are there opportunities for the public to get involved, to donate, to volunteer? Does it tell anything how a person
see, I haven't reread this. Let's see. I think so. It doesn't have a really good contact there. I'll look and send that to you, Karen. And
Okay, I'm also typing into the chat the Bee Conservancy, and then I'm going to put in
is that the Xerxes Foundation? They've been amazing over the years.
I don't
XEREZ.
yeah, I don't know. It's just called the Bee Conservancy, and they have ways that you can donate. They have kits you can download. So I'm thinking of, incorporating this into the summer children's reading program at the museum. How fun would that be? And, bee activities and whatnot. And then lots of ideas on that. And then I also want to put in taosbee.com for people, for Moira's products, if people are interested in that. And so I just want to wrap it up as we're getting close to the time. I want to thank our guests. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing in this community conversation as we try to expand our museum voice and be a part of, the larger world and region, and be engaged with our community. So thank you so much. And thank you, Sara. You're welcome. And thank you, Sara. And I want to congratulate Sara too, because her most recent book, Unplugged Voices, has won New Mexico Book Association's Gold Award for design and production. And even more exciting, I do want to say, Sara has just recently been accepted. She is the New Mexico Humanities Chautauqua speaker now. So yay, Sara. I was really happy that she achieved that status, so to speak, and really she's going to be presenting about the importance of oral histories and how to go about that. Also, so we have a new introductory gallery at the museum. This was a team effort here by several staff people, and it's called It's a Way of Life. And it centers visitors in a seasonal perspective of northern New Mexico and Taos, and then also engages people and encourages to leave a phrase or a story or a verse of some inspired seasonal memory or ideas that people have. And upcoming exhibition, New Mexico Artists Around the Kitchen Table, which is going to be guest curated by Dr. Michelle Lanteri. And many of you know that Michelle was our curator. She's now at the Albuquerque Museum, and she's going to join us again for this exhibition that will run from October 14th to January 24th, 2024. Currently, we have Fatima Ronquillo's Recollecting Portraits of Enchantment, which is here through September 24th. And the museum is open 7 days a week, 10 to 5. We will be closed September 30th in honor of San Geronimo Day. So that's all I got. Thank you so much.
I might just mention that I have in 2020 published a book of working with the land and playing in the kitchen. And
thank you.
It's available at Somos and OpSit, and I could certainly bring a copy to you to have as a sample.
Oh, lovely.
Talks about all this gardening and beekeeping.
Yep. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks, everybody. It's so nice to have you. And I look forward to future conversations and meeting in person.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Buzz on, everyone.
Yes, buzz on. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.